Danielle stood quietly outside the door of the will reading room, feeling like a stranger who had accidentally stepped into a place that had never welcomed her. Inside, yellow light spilled over a long oak table where her parents and siblings were already seated, their faces cold, as if everything had been decided long before she arrived. No one invited her to sit. No one looked at her with the warmth of family. Her father, Richard, fixed her with a sharp gaze and coldly said that everything had already been divided and she had no reason to be there. Her mother, Margaret, remained silent, but her tightly pressed lips and disdainful look made the atmosphere even heavier. Tom and Sophia didn't bother hiding their irritation, as if Danielle's presence itself was an insult. Danielle felt her chest tighten. She was used to being excluded from the family, but this moment still hurt like a fresh wound. Even so, she didn't turn away. She stood up straight, trying to remain calm under the icy stares directed at her. Just then, the lawyer cleared his throat softly, his hands fumbling with the stack of papers in front of him. He hesitated, as if about to reveal something he knew would shake the entire room. Then, in a trembling voice, he announced that there was an issue with the will. The whole room froze, and when he pointed toward Danielle, saying that her name was the only one written in her grandfather's will, the silence shattered into pieces. The atmosphere in the room seemed to freeze after the lawyer's confirmation. Danielle could clearly hear the faint clink of a glass against the table as Sophia went pale, her hand trembling so badly she almost dropped it. Richard was the first to jump to his feet, his face flushed with anger, as if in just a few seconds, all the control he believed he had was ripped away. He spoke through clenched teeth, insisting it was impossible, that there must be a mistake in the documents. But the lawyer, though nervous, tried to stay composed and confirmed that the will was completely valid, made while the grandfather was fully lucid and acting of his own free will. Everything from the house and land to the money in the accounts had been left to Danielle. Margaret finally spoke, her voice sharp as a blade. She didn't look at the lawyer but stared directly at Danielle, as if everything happening was her fault. She said Danielle shouldn't even be there, that the family had intentionally not informed her about the reading of the will to avoid this very situation. The words struck like a stab to the heart, but Danielle didn't back down. She looked at each member of her family, people who should have been her support, yet had always treated her like a stain to be erased. Tom gritted his teeth and spat out bitter words, saying Danielle had left, that she hadn't stayed to care for the family, and therefore had no right to receive anything. Sophia added harshly that their grandfather must have been influenced or mistaken when writing the will. Danielle clenched her hands, steadying her breath amid the chaos surrounding her. Then she spoke, slowly but firmly, saying this wasn't something she had taken, it was her grandfather's final decision. And this time, she would not let anyone take it away from her. Her words made the already tense room feel even more suffocating. For a few seconds, no one spoke, but the silence was far from peaceful. It felt like the stillness before a storm. Richard leaned forward, pressing his hands against the edge of the table, staring at Danielle with a mix of anger and disbelief. Richard stared at Danielle, his eyes filled with both anger and disbelief. He couldn't accept that someone he had always seen as weak and easily dominated was now standing in front of the entire family, daring to defend her own rights. Margaret, too, had lost her usual cold composure. Her face turned pale with rage, but beneath it was a flicker of panic as she realized all their plans had collapsed in an instant. Sophia let out a bitter laugh, her voice trembling with resentment. She accused Danielle of ruining everything, saying that the house, the land, and the money were meant for those who had stayed with the family. Tom stepped forward, his voice heavy and aggressive, as if trying to crush Danielle with intimidation. He brought up how she had left, how she had distanced herself from this home, and concluded that someone like her had no right to return and claim it all. But this time, Danielle didn't avoid them. She looked straight at them, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. Yet the fear that once controlled her was no longer strong enough to make her bow her head. She spoke slowly, explaining that she hadn't left out of selfishness, but because staying would have destroyed her. Her grandfather was the only one who understood, that the only one who saw the pain she had hidden for so many years. That was why his decision wasn't a mistake, but the final truth he wanted to leave behind. And Danielle knew that from this moment on, she wasn't just protecting an inheritance, she was protecting her own worth. The moment she finished speaking, Sophia slammed her glass onto the table, dark red liquid splashing across the white tablecloth like a wound being torn open. She nearly jumped to her feet, her voice shrill with anger, insisting that their grandfather had been too old and no longer clear-minded to make such a decision. Tom immediately backed her up, claiming the will must be flawed, that Danielle must have secretly influenced him while the rest of the family wasn't paying attention. Accusations poured down like a storm, leaving Danielle no room to breathe. But what hurt her the most wasn't the slander, it was how easily they said it, as if she had always been someone untrustworthy in their eyes. Danielle clenched her fingers so tightly that her nails dug into her skin. Anger burned in her chest, but this time she didn't let it turn into tears or silent submission like before. She lifted her head, looked each of them in the eye, and calmly asked, if they truly believed their grandfather was not of sound mind, then why had they been waiting all this time for the will to divide the inheritance? The question froze the room for a few brief seconds. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his voice still slightly shaky but firm as he confirmed that he had met the grandfather many times before the will was signed. And in every meeting, the old man had been completely lucid, aware, and fully understood what he was doing. Richard's face darkened instantly. He slammed his hand on the table and ordered Danielle to be quiet, warning her not to think she could use a few documents to stand against the entire family. But his threat no longer made her shrink back. Danielle lowered her gaze to the will in front of her, seeing her name clearly printed on every page, an undeniable truth. She realized that this was not just an inheritance her grandfather had left behind, but the final proof that someone in her family had truly seen her worth. The room fell silent again, but this time it was not simple shock, it was the heavy silence of a confrontation pushed to its limit. Danielle could feel every pair of eyes fixed on her, sharp, furious, full of pressure, as if the slightest hesitation would allow them to tear everything away from her. Before, just one look like that from her parents would have been enough to make her retreat, but now, she was no longer that frightened child. In the past, just one look like that from them would have been enough to make her afraid enough to make her fall silent, step back, and convince herself that she must be the one in the wrong. But now, standing in that familiar yet strangely distant room, Danielle suddenly realized she was no longer the trembling child who waited to be loved. She took a deep breath, forcing her heart to slow, and then spoke more calmly than she had expected. She said she wasn't here to fight, nor to seek anyone's approval. She was here for the truth. Her grandfather had written her name in the will not by mistake, not under pressure, but because he understood what had truly happened in this family better than anyone else. He was the only one who had seen her pain, the times she was pushed aside, the years she lived feeling like she didn't belong in her own home. And so, if she bowed her head and gave up now, it would be the same as betraying the last trust her grandfather had placed in her. Richard let out a scornful laugh. Margaret turned away as if she didn't want to hear any more. Tom and Sophia looked at her as if she had become their greatest enemy. But Danielle didn't stop. She said, slowly, that for the first time in her life, she would not let them decide whether she was worthy or not. She would keep what belonged to her, not just the inheritance, but the self-respect she had lost for so many years. Her words seemed to touch the very crack the family had always tried to hide. No one immediately argued back, but the tension in the room grew heavier, layer by layer, until even breathing felt difficult. Danielle stood there, feeling the past rush back into her mind, memories sharp like shards of broken glass. She remembered sitting quietly at the corner of the table during meals, ignored. She remembered birthdays that passed like ordinary days, no cake, no wishes, just the feeling of being unwanted in her own home. She remembered nights locked outside, hugging herself in the cold, all because she had said something the family didn't want to hear. She looked at her parents, people who always hid behind the excuse of discipline to deny the pain they caused. Richard used strictness as a tool for control. Margaret turned coldness into silent authority, making Danielle grow up believing she would never be good enough no matter how hard she tried. Tom and Sophia were no different. They had lived too long in the comfort of favoritism to see her unfair treatment as anything unusual. Only her grandfather had seen the truth behind her quiet endurance. Danielle's voice lowered, but every word became clearer than ever. She said the deepest pain had never been about losing money or property, it was about being treated like a mistake by her own family. She had lived too long with that pain, questioning whether she truly had no value, just as they had made her believe. But now, standing before a will that carried her name, she understood that at least one person had believed she deserved to be loved, to be seen, and to keep what was rightfully hers. The atmosphere in the room began to shift from tension to chaos as her family realized they could no longer force her to back down like before. Richard stepped closer, his voice low but threatening, saying that if she went through with claiming the inheritance, she would no longer be part of this family. It wasn't a warning, it sounded like a sentence that had long been prepared. Margaret, too, lost her composure. Margaret stepped forward, trying to take Danielle's hand, her voice softer but laced with familiar manipulation, pleading with her to reconsider, saying the family could still fix everything if she would just listen. Across the room, Sophia burst into tears. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes were still calculating. She claimed that if Danielle took everything, they would be left with nothing, that she was destroying the future of those who had stayed and remained loyal to the family. Tom could no longer hold back. He stepped forward, his voice low and threatening, as if trying to crush Danielle's will, warning that she would regret continuing down this path. Their words, threats, pleas, and accusations blended together into a heavy pressure pressing down on her shoulders. But Danielle stood still. She neither pulled her hand away nor stepped forward. She simply looked at each of them quietly, and in that moment, she realized that none of their emotions came from love, they came from fear of losing what they believed was theirs. The concern they showed had never been for her, only for what she held. Realizing this, her heart no longer wavered. Danielle gently pulled her hand away from her mother's, and her gaze became firm. She understood that if she gave in now, she would fall back into the same place she had always been, where her voice had no value. And this time, she would not let that happen again. She looked down at the pen resting on the table. It felt as though all the sounds around her faded, leaving only the steady beat of her heart. In front of her, the will lay neatly, her name clearly written, undeniable. Just one signature, and everything would officially belong to her. But in that moment, she also understood that what she was about to sign was not just an inheritance, it was a decision to completely cut ties with the past that had followed her for so many years. Richard still stared at her with burning eyes. Margaret stood frozen. Tom and Sophia seemed to be waiting for the final second to snatch away whatever chance remained. They wanted her to be afraid, to hesitate, to let go out of guilt and doubt. Danielle felt all of it and felt the old pain rising in her chest at the thought that from this moment on, she might truly have no family left. But then she thought of her grandfather, his warm voice, his kind eyes, the only person who had ever made her feel worthy in that house. That memory steadied her hand. Slowly, she picked up the pen. As the tip touched the paper, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Danielle signed each stroke slowly and clearly, as if rewriting her life with her own hands. When she finished, she set the pen down and looked up at everyone. There was no fear left, no avoidance. Calmly, she said she had lost too many years living under their judgment, and now, she chose to keep what was hers. Not just the inheritance, but her dignity, her right to exist, and the part of herself she would never again let anyone take away. After signing, Danielle didn't stay for even a second longer. She carefully folded the document and placed it into her bag, as if holding on to something fragile yet priceless. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, the room exploded. Richard shouted for her to stop, his voice echoing like thunder. Margaret called her name, but her voice still carried more control and blame than love. Tom hurled threats. Sophia sobbed as if she were the one betrayed. But Danielle didn't look back. She knew that even a single moment of hesitation would drag her back into the same cycle of guilt, fear, and submission. The lawyer quickly gathered the documents and followed her out, silently ensuring no one could stop her again. As they stepped down from the house, the cool air touched her face, waking her from the suffocating tension she had just left behind. But she wasn't free yet. For everything to take effect, the will had to be submitted to the court and processed legally, so she and the lawyer went straight there. On the way, her phone kept vibrating in her pocket. She didn't need to check to know who it was. Her family was still trying to pull her back with anger, threats, or pleas, but this time, she ignored it. Standing at the court counter, watching the clerk check the documents and stamp them, Danielle felt a shiver run down her spine. Not from fear, but from realization. From that moment on, it was real. She was the legal heir, and no one could take it away from her. Later, standing on the porch, still holding the documents tightly as if they might disappear if she let go. She felt the evening breeze pass through the old garden carrying the scent of wood, leaves, and memories that once hurt, but now felt strangely gentle. She stepped inside, looking at each photograph, each familiar object, and for the first time in her life, she no longer felt like someone standing outside the door. She finally understood. What her grandfather left her was not just wealth, it was the chance to reclaim her worth. She had once believed family was something to hold on to, no matter how much it hurt. She thought that if she endured long enough, was patient enough, obedient enough, she would eventually be loved. She was wrong. Some places called family only make you feel small, afraid, and unworthy. And if you keep holding on to people who never truly value you, the one who loses the most will always be yourself. Today, standing in that house, she understood something clearly. Sharing blood doesn't guarantee love, and walking away from those who hurt you is not selfish. Sometimes, it's the only way to save yourself. She didn't choose money over family. She chose self-respect over suffering. She chose peace over pain. And the greatest lesson she learned was this: don't wait for others to recognize your worth. At some point, you have to stand up and protect it yourself.